Make more good in the all-new Sportage X-Pro. Kia, movement that inspires.
Quaker Steak and Lube is throwing open the garage doors and setting up the umbrellas. It's patio season. Come enjoy great food, drinks, and fun in the sun. There's always something happening at Quaker Steak and Lube, but we're really amping up our event calendars for our favorite time of year. Visit thelube.com to find out what's happening at your local lube this season. Lunch, happy hour, dinner, or late night, indoors or outside, at Quaker Steak and Lube, you'll always find big flavors, friendly faces, and lots of fun.
New Trail Brewing Company proudly crafts their beers right here in central Pennsylvania. Brewed with only the best possible ingredients, New Trail produces a variety of year-round brands as well as weekly experimental recipes. New Trail Broken Heels is Pennsylvania's favorite local hazy IPA. This beer is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is perfect for a pregame tailgate all the way through the victory celebration.
What's the best mid-size pickup? Tacoma. What's the #1 mid-size truck in resale value? Tacoma. Want to get great gas mileage, 4 doors, and 4-wheel drive? Tacoma. Sioka Toyota of Williamsport has over 25 available right now. You can lease a brand new, never-driven Toyota Tacoma for just $379 a month. That's 30 months, 3,000 cash or trade, 10,000 miles a year. This is while supplies last. Buy yours or reserve yours today and see the Sioka difference. And remember, tell them Johnny sent you.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome into another edition of the Lion Country Kia Goon and Ironhead show. No Goon today. Chris Buganati kind enough to fill in here at Quaker Steak and Lube on what is a wintry, cold day, but not much in the way of snow today, so we'll take it as a mild victory.
It could be worse. We could be up in Buffalo.
Oh, man. I'm telling you. Yep. Could be much, much worse.
Did you hear that game is probably moving to Ford Field?
Is that I heard that they were looking at I had not heard.
I mean, I get it. 6 feet of snow, right? But damn.
Yeah, that's how do they handle that? Do you know, like with season ticket holders, do they have I mean, you can't just
I have no idea.
They have to refund or something. Like, and I don't know if that would be I feel like that has to be the league that steps in. I mean, you can't ask the Bills to or maybe you can.
It's happened once before
that works.
In Buffalo, where they, at least to my knowledge, where they had to move a game because of a snowstorm. So there must be a procedure in place.
Yeah,
I have no idea. That's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I just I don't know. That would be big time bummed if you're a Bills fan. It's like, not only do I have to deal with this feet of snow, I don't even get to go use the tickets that I paid a fortune for to go watch the team that might be in the midst of an historic season. Just kind of adding, and again, I understand it and probably the right decision, but man, it's kind of brutal if you're a Bills fan there. It's like, well, the one thing I have to look forward this weekend. Oh no, never mind.
Yeah, not to mention, like, who as a football fan wasn't looking forward to them figuring out a way to make that work in that environment.
Yeah. Oh wow. Penn State at Rutgers, Booch, and I don't know. This is I know this is a game that the Rutgers players and Greg Schiotto generally circle with big asterisks on it and the whole bit. This just seems like a Rutgers team, and then Goon texted us earlier today, and I'm kind of on board with Goon, who sees a Penn State blowout coming because Penn State is really motivated. And for as much as I do think Rutgers, I mean, I do think if they are going to get up for a game, this would be it. I don't think there's a whole lot of energy right now surrounding that Rutgers program. And I just think it's hard to kind of manufacture, even if you truly despise Penn State and it's the one team that you want to beat, when you've been beaten down the way Rutgers has here. I just think it's hard to truly believe, okay, man, we're going to rally, and this is going to be the one game we put it all together. And so I just think the combination of Rutgers trending downward, and I just don't think showing a lot of heart, and Penn State, I think, maybe with its best performance, Ohio State, but the last two games, anyways, would be the best two performances by Penn State this season. And, I think it was interesting. I was at the State College football practice yesterday and was just kind of eavesdropping on a interview with a newspaper writer before practice with Matt Lentell, the head coach of the Little Lions. And it just brings me back to why I do think this Penn State team is different than what we've seen the last couple of years, and it is that senior leadership. And Matt Lentell was talking about the senior leadership on that state high squad as they hit into the state playoffs, and that has been, all the difference in the world, that those guys have taken, to use Goon's term, ownership of the team, and it is a player-led team, and Lentell was talking about, these guys hold each other accountable, and if somebody's slacking on a day, it's not the coaches that are needing to step up and say anything, it's the seniors on the team, and they will talk to each other as well as the underclassmen. And I think you've seen that, Sean Clifford is getting what is it, nominated for man of the year or whatever it is, but basically the guy that showing leadership in college football, and I just
deservedly so.
Yeah, I think Clifford and Mustafa and the Jair Brown, it is a group of leaders that hold themselves accountable, and I just think it is a huge difference maker. And I think the way you saw this team respond to the very disappointing game at Michigan has a ton to do with that leadership. Yeah. And, I think Penn State is going to finish up strongly here. We'll see. But I mean, I really do. Based on the last couple of games, there's no reason to not think that that's going to be the case. And I think I think they're going to, we'll see what the matchup is and everything, but I think they're going to win the bowl game almost regardless of who the opponent is, and set themselves at least in good position to make a run at the playoffs again next season.
I think you hit on a lot of key points there. Just to touch on the senior leadership aspect. So we had a guy on the Players Show on Monday who is a name who's probably not familiar to all but like the most diehard Penn State football fans who memorized the roster up and down. But a really interesting conversation. Redshirt senior by the name of Grayson Klein. He's a Pennsylvania kid, grew up in Berks County, played I think his last 2 years of high school football in Lancaster County, and he was a quarterback who, as a junior, started to get some attention in his senior season. He was getting some opportunities to go visit some smaller Division I schools, but definitely getting interest. Midway through his senior season, had a catastrophic knee injury. I think he fractured his tibia and blew out his ACL, MCL, and PCL all on one play. And overnight, all the offers dry up. And he said it was a few more weeks into his recovery when Coach Franklin offered him the walk-on spot. He said, football may not be over for you. We think we've got a spot for you. So, just to have gone from that kind of an injury to where you think your football career is over to now, you're going to get a chance to come play and run out of the tunnel at Penn State. This is a lifelong fan who had been watching games with his dad since he was a little kid. You're not going to play a lot in all likelihood, but you're going to be a key part of the program. And he talked about coming in and getting converted to tight end and being in a tight end room with Nick Bowers and Pat Fryermuth and oh God, I'm totally blanking on the other kid's name. We moved him from defensive end to tight end. I'm blanked on it. Anyway, old age. And the value of being able to be around all those veteran leaders and how he has now made it his goal this season to be a mentor to all of our young tight ends in that room and pass on what he observed from that really strong position group that he was a part of. The guys you named, 100%, they are the tip of the spear, but I really get the sense that any of those guys, you go up and down the rosters from the household names to the Grayson Kleins of the world.
Yeah.
If they've got that red shirt senior next to their name, or on a live stream, I can say it, they've seen some shit in their time here. And I really think that is paying dividends for all the young talent we've got on this team where, you know, all these true freshmen came in who athletically were ready to step on the field. It looks to me like the upperclassmen on the team have done a really good job showing them what it means to do everything else, right? You've got the talent, but the talent's not enough.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that I think the neat thing about it from a fan or a coach's vantage point is that there is that willingness within the senior class to embrace these freshmen who are, in some cases, taking away playing time from some of the seniors, and also of the freshmen who were rightfully highly heralded coming in, being humble enough to accept some mentoring and guidance in terms of, okay, this is how to navigate the step up in not just competition, but in academics and everything else that comes with it. And so, you know, I think that the fact that you have, and Goon's made the point before that, you know, that there has to be that chemistry on the team, and that's it's something that you can try to set a standard and develop the culture, which I think is the most overused term in sports. But I mean, coaches are trying to do that to develop, okay, this is, you know, an expectation and a standard that we have here. And when you come in, you learn from the older guys. I mean, that's what all coaches are trying to do. But when you have, but you can't manufacture that genuine appreciation both ways. And again, I do think that the older players on this team have an appreciation for the enthusiasm and talent that the youngsters are bringing in. Yeah. And I think the youngsters genuinely have an appreciation for what these older players have been through and for the guidance that they can provide in terms of how to navigate at that first or second year in a big time program like this.
It's also just, I mean, for all of that, it is also a matter of talent disparity. When Rutgers brought Greg Schiano back, I think the conventional wisdom, and it had some validity in my opinion, was this is the guy who knows how to win at Rutgers. If there's any guy who can inject some energy into that program, it's Greg Schiano, because he's done it before. He's coming in with a chip on his shoulder because of his experience in the NFL and getting run out of the Tennessee job. And this is a good match between where he is at personally and professionally and what that program needs. And he knows how to win there, the whole 9 yards. The problem is, and I was thinking about this week, that it really, there really hasn't been too much of a boost that materialized. They got to go to a bowl game on kind of a technicality last year, despite only winning 5 games, and they got blown out. Greg Schiano showed that he knew how to win at Rutgers in the Big East. It is an entirely different matter when you're playing in instead of the Big East, you're in the Big Ten East. Right.
Well, and I'm telling you, it's the same thing I think with Mike Loxley at Maryland, because I do think he is a terrific coach. Yeah. I really do. And I think he has upgraded that program despite the results being what they are. I think we even talked about it when they made that hire. I'm like, I think it is a great hire. I don't think it's going to change much in terms of the hierarchy in the Big Ten East, because I think there is a ceiling right now for where Maryland can go. And listen, to be honest with you, we'll see. I'm still not sure that there's not a ceiling. I think it's a higher ceiling, obviously, for Penn State, and I'm talking about consistently. I do think Penn State is a team and a program under James Franklin that can get to the college football playoffs. I think could win a national title. But I think in terms of becoming like the next Ohio State and establishing what Ohio State has, I don't know that you can do that because Ohio State's there.
Yep.
And now you're going to have USC coming in, and truthfully, Butch, it's interesting. And I mean, you never say never, and obviously you can get magic sometimes with the right coach and the right program. But I think much the same thing about Nebraska right now. I still think Scott Frost was a terrific coach, and for a multitude of reasons, and we've heard some different things that maybe why that didn't pan out the way I was expecting it to anyway going in. But it is really hard to make any kind of quantum leap consistently in a conference like the Big Ten, just as it is the SEC. And it takes a while. I mean, Georgia, it took a little while to kind of get that step.
Yep.
And right now, I think Georgia, if you're looking at kind of the Big Four on a consistent basis, I think Georgia now has maybe kind of displaced Clemson in that big boy board. And I think Clemson has dropped down into that next group right now, which is kind of where I think Penn State is. But Alabama, despite the horrific season they're having, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State right now are the three programs that I think are definitively there. And then I think there are a couple of others that are on the brink. We'll see kind of how things go. LSU could very well be there. We'll see what happens the next couple of years. I think Texas has a chance to make, they're certainly not there now, but I think that's a program that might have a chance. I think USC, but USC's problem is going to be the same thing going into the Big Ten. And listen, the paradigm is going to change here with the added playoff teams.
Sure.
And I think there's been I forget who it was that did that article on, how differently would you be looking at James Franklin right now if there were 12-team playoffs for all of his, and I think it's a fair and legitimate point, and I think we the fans and media would be looking at it differently if we're talking about a Penn State team that was in the playoffs, 3 or 4 years there, which, if it was expanded to 12 teams, they definitively would have been.
Well, let's think. It's a very interesting theoretical to kick around because it's so different from the way we've experienced college football all our lives, including throughout the short playoff era here. Let's just think about college basketball. Now, as Penn State fans, and we should, talk briefly a little bit about the men's team, but as Penn State fans, we have a different standard for what makes a good season, right? But let's look at some of the other conference teams who are not at the top of the top. Like if you're at Michigan State or, alternatingly either Ohio State or Michigan or Illinois, they have all had national title, Final Four type contending teams in the last 5 to 10 years. But if you're Minnesota or Iowa or, what's another kind of middle of the pack team? And Purdue has pretty high expectations. Indiana these days, frankly, unfortunately for them, despite the history of that program. If you make the tournament, right there, you feel decent about your season, right? Correct. And you can say, well, there's way more teams that make the tournament. Well, there's way more teams. There's like 300 some teams that can qualify to make the tournament. It's just that sense that we were there and we did enough during our season to get a shot. Yep. So I've been asking myself the same question. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here. I still don't know what I'm going to think about a spot, the 11 seed in a 12-team playoff. And, what if I guess you saw probably that the Athletic put out what would the 12-team playoff look like, and Penn State would be opening up in Knoxville. Yep. You lose to Tennessee in the first round of a 12-team playoff, and then there's still weeks more of teams playing. How great do you feel about that? I mean, I don't know, but I can definitely buy the perspective that even though 12 seems like a lot compared to what we've had, still not very many in the grand scheme of college football. There's like 65 teams probably whose fans start the season at least hoping for a few breaks to go their way and maybe get it in the mix for a 12-team playoff. So you get one of those spots you probably feel pretty good about your season, especially if you can win around.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is if it's a consistent thing that you're in and you're winning a game or two, let's say over a 5-year period you're in there 3 or 4 times and you're advancing at least a time or two.
Yeah,
I think overall as a fan base, with the exception perhaps these days of Alabama or Georgia, maybe now, or Ohio State, I think you're feeling pretty good about your program as a whole. And even those programs and fan bases, I mean, they're not going to be up in arms about it. There's maybe a different standard at Alabama right now, but even there, I don't think you're like, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world. If again, you're getting there more often than not, and you're advancing, let's say two out of every 5 years. That's pretty significant achievement, and I think puts you again into that discussion of wherever the tiers are, you're at least, I think, clearly going to be looked at as at the very least in that second tier of elite, great, however you want to rank them, teams. And I think that's and yeah, there's obviously always, I mean, if you go in 3 years in a row and you get blown out every time, there's the risk of, like Notre Dame with the college football playoffs as it was. It's like, oh no, we're in it again. And now look what's going to happen. So, I mean, I get that could be part of it too. But again, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you're telling me you still wouldn't have rather been in those games and in the college football playoffs than to have fallen short.
Exactly.
And it's just the same thing as, the NCAA basketball tournament. Even if you get in and get blown out in the first round, again, almost all fan bases and all fans would prefer that than winning the NIT, because you understand the difference in what that means for your program from a selling standpoint and from a prestige standpoint. So again, we'll see how it all moves forward. I do really like Penn State, even though on the road, and we've had some bad experiences with Rutgers. I'm just not even sure that fan base is going to be as riled up as they usually are for Penn State. It's November. They are done, and they know. I mean, you're looking at Penn State. This is a good Penn State team that's coming in. You might hate Penn State, but I think I can't imagine there are many fans there at Rutgers that don't have a sense of inevitability about the outcome of Saturday's game.
Well, the way some previous Penn State seasons have gone, if you were among the most optimistic of the Rutger faithful, whoever those folks happen to be, you could at least convince yourself that you caught a whiff of blood in the water, right? Like, a couple of times we've had to play a backup quarterback for the Rutgers game the last few years. We've been coming off some tough losses.
Yeah.
Been in the midst of some tough seasons. You can maybe say, guys, if we give them, they're down. They're down. They're exposed. If we can give them our best shot, if we can play our perfect game, we can get them. This is not one of those Penn State teams.
No.
I mean, they have absolutely dismantled 2 crappy teams 2 weeks in a row. One on the road, one at home, one in nice weather, one in bad weather.
Yeah.
Coming off a rough loss to Ohio State. They just absolutely take Indiana apart methodically, and then they're even more stifling in shutting down Maryland the next week. You would have to be under the influence of some pretty strong narcotics to believe that Rutgers even has a snowball's chance in hell this weekend.
Yep. And and it's just a matchup thing too. I mean, even on top of everything else, it's just not. Their run defense is not especially good.
Correct.
Their offense, period, is not especially good. And again, you're playing a Penn State defense that is flying around right now and seems to have firm command of what it's wanting to do and is going out and executing it.
Yeah.
And it's a Penn State run game that has really rounded into form here. I don't see the recipe here for Rutgers, not only for Rutgers victory. I don't see the recipe for Rutgers to stay within. I think it's about a 20-point right.
I was surprised the line wasn't higher.
I don't think that's enough. I really don't. So we'll see. I've been wrong plenty of times. Maybe Rutgers does find that inspiration to get up for Penn State. I just think if Penn State comes out and puts together a drive early in the game, and I just don't think it's going to take much to.
It would be shocking
for the white flags.
To see this game competitive for very long. I mean, sometimes when you play these undermanned teams, they just give you everything they got in the first quarter. And they can hang around for a little while, but eventually the dam just bursts. And I have a tough time picturing Rutgers staying in it in the third quarter, in the second quarter, and forget about the second half.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, Booch, I mean, once you get past the top 6, maybe 7 teams right now, I mean, I think Penn State's right there.
I'm with you.
I don't know, exactly where in the 8 to 12 mix they are. But I think they're right there. And any of those teams, again, on a given Saturday, I think are perfectly capable of knocking off a team that's having a little bit of an off day from the upper tier there. And even Georgia, it's funny how we start to build this aura of invincibility. Tennessee had it until Georgia waxed them. Listen, Georgia's a very good football team. I'm not going to tell you anything different, but I just don't think there are unbeatable teams anymore in college football. There's not that type of separation. And again, Alabama's a couple of plays away from being undefeated and probably having that aura of invincibility. I mean,
that's what's crazy to me. Like, look, I'm sick of Alabama like everyone else. So I really hope they don't, I hope they don't get anywhere near the playoffs this year. But you're now starting to hear the conversations bubble up. Well, if this happens and this happens, and if you look at objectively, look at Alabama's resume, I think you and I have even talked about it. Their 2 losses are to 2 teams with 1 or 0 losses, and one to the other,
right?
And they're both by 1 score.
Yes,
like it's actually a pretty impressive resume. Now,
and both
I
on
think
the road.
Great point.
I
I think part of it, Ironhead, is that we're so used to seeing Nick Saban and Alabama look absolutely invincible and win those 1-score games where it's close at the end, that they lose 2 of them and we're like, oh, this team's terrible. This is the worst Alabama team in the decade.
Yeah, I mean,
if Penn State was in the exact same situation, our hair would be on fire, metaphorically in some of our cases. Just scream into the heavens that we were among the very best teams in the country.
Yeah, I think rightfully campaigning for a spot in the playoffs.
It makes me feel sick and filthy to be making, because I am not campaigning for Alabama to get into the Final Four. Like, please, just got 1 year. Give us 1 year off.
I'm with you 100%.
But if I take the bias out of it, man, it's a pretty impressive claim.
Well, and I am going to be interested to see, a lot of
especially if they
conversation.
somehow find a way to beat Georgia.
A lot of conversation, and that's, the worst case scenario. I think for the committee, as well as for college football,
anyone who's not an Alabama fan,
is Alabama beating Georgia, and especially if it's somewhat convincingly, right? Like if it's a double-digit victory. I mean, it doesn't have to be a blowout, but 31-21 Bama win. And I don't think that's, I mean, that is not exactly an absurd notion to think that would happen. Then, and let me throw something else into the mix, because, most people, and I'm probably on board with it. I'm not in terms of what will happen. If Ohio State beats Michigan, I do think Michigan is out of the mix for the college football playoffs because of the strength of schedule.
Yeah, they would need some help for sure.
But let me throw this into the convoluted mess. Let's say Michigan wins, and it's a they win in overtime by a field goal or on the last play, and they got a questionable interference call that goes their way, and everybody's up in arms about it. So, oh my gosh, he never even touched him, and that was an interference. And well, you can't, though, not recognize an undefeated Big Ten champion Michigan team, right? But most people right now consider Ohio State a clear-cut 2 behind Georgia in the national rankings. If Ohio State loses a very close and maybe even controversial game, I'm not sure how you would keep Ohio State out. And so then you have both of those teams in there. And again, if Alabama beats Michigan, Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, I mean, that is the worst case scenario, right? Because now you're trying to decide between, in terms of who to leave out. You can't. I mean, the argument is going to be you can't leave out a one-loss Georgia team, for crying out loud. They were the best team all
number one all year. Yeah.
And the argument is going to be you can't leave out a one-loss Tennessee team that was the story of college football, and the only loss was to that Georgia team that you just said you can't leave out. You're not going to be able to leave out. I mean, and you are going to have to leave some of these teams out. So I understand. I mean, I'm going to go through the list here, but the argument is going to be you can't leave out an Ohio State team that lost on a close, controversial ending. You can't leave out an undefeated Michigan team. You can't leave out and already we're an Alabama team that only had those two losses on the road to two
and beat the best team in the country. Yeah, they've got the best win.
But you can't leave LSU out. LSU has two losses, but beat Alabama head to head. Well, you can't take Alabama over LSU.
Toss in a one-loss Oregon or USC.
USC is going to be very much in the mix here.
I'm sorry. Oregon already lost the second game, but one loss USC. Yeah,
if USC wins out, which is a big if, and
they would at that point USC would have a win over Notre Dame, which looked like it was not going to be a quality win halfway through the season, but now I think would be perceived as one for sure.
And can I just say, a Notre Dame fan or apologist, I am certainly not, but I really do love Freeman, and I love that hire, and I am really glad for him and his sake that this season is turning out the way it has.
I can grant you
for Notre Dame, because those players. I mean, that was one of the lasting images for me from college football last year was the Notre Dame the players' reaction to learning that Freeman was their head coach when he came in. And I just think it was a cool story, and I'm glad to see it's turning out the way it is. And I'll be rooting for Notre Dame, by the way, against USC in that particular match.
Same, absolutely. Penn State fans are big Fighting Irish fans in that game. So let me just point something out. You went through that whole litany of very, very realistic playoff scenarios.
And did not touch on an undefeated team that is in the top four now.
As soon as they debuted made their top four debut, I texted some of my friends and I was like, they're going to get jobbed again. 100%. Just insane. My point is, if you think there's a reasonable chance there's nothing they can do to stay in your top four, don't put them there.
I don't disagree with you.
What are this is already, for context, this has already happened once in the first year of the playoffs. Number 4 undefeated TCU scored 55 points in their last regular season game, won by 40 or 45, and dropped. I just thought if you believe this team is the 4th best team in the country, then they shouldn't be able to drop by winning. And if you believe that there are other teams, and you can make a good argument with the Big 12 this year, but if you believe there are other teams that would still be better in your estimation with a single loss on their resume, then rank them below those teams. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Don't just say, well, we're going to tease you. I just used a term that I was about to use a term I don't want to use on a live stream. We're going to tease you with the top 4 ranking when it doesn't matter. And then when push comes to shove, like, come on, SEC and Big Ten teams are getting in. You guys are out.
Yep.
You're done. Go enjoy the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, and I mean, it is going to be interesting to see how this all.
I just feel terrible
out.
for those fans. Like, I think every Penn State fan has
and
this little like
TCU,
hereditary soft spot for teams that go undefeated and get frozen out of the championship conversation.
Yeah, if you're TCU, you're hoping Georgia wins out. You're hoping Ohio State wins out,
right?
And you're hoping that nothing else too crazy happens, because then I do think, like, I think an undefeated TCU gets in over a one-loss Michigan,
probably.
And so I mean, I do think if Georgia wins out and Ohio State wins out, I think it is pretty likely, not a certainty, but pretty likely that TCU is in. I think Tennessee would probably be the
that said, go Baylor, because I'm trying to go to the Rose Bowl. Ironhead.
Well, and so that's the other thing. Now, from a Penn State perspective, right? If Goons, and I'm sure he is right, and I don't know why I'm as surprised about that as I am, that the Rose Bowl is as motivating of a factor as he says it is for these guys.
It seems to be, yeah.
But then you are rooting for Michigan to beat Ohio State in that Big Ten championship game in a close competitive game, because
correct.
Because
you want Michigan with the weaker non-conference resume to be able to get the win over Ohio State. Like, far more likely
that
Big
Ohio
Ten
State
champion Michigan plus 1 loss Ohio State than the other way around.
Yeah. And so, and that's the scenario that then gets Penn State to the.
You want to talk about feeling filthy? That's worse than rooting for Notre Dame against USC, in my opinion.
Yes,
I hate it.
With you,
but
very
uncomfortable. If you got a chance to go to the Rose Bowl, you got to root for it, I think.
Yeah, I guess I'm. And I get the Rose. I mean, it is a cool thing, and I'm not trying to detract from that. I'm looking at it from a fan's perspective, and one that grew up my whole life believing being an independent was the greatest thing in the world, and I think it was in the 80s. The schedule that Penn State was able to put together. I mean, obviously, winning a couple of national titles helped solidify the feeling. But the fact that you were seeing Nebraska, Notre Dame, Alabama, all of the Eastern rivals, which had some very good teams throughout there with Syracuse and Boston College, with Flutie and West Virginia and Pitt. I mean, it was just a smorgasbord of great matchups and great teams that you got to see. If you were a Penn State fan, then schedules like that you just aren't going to see anymore in terms of a cross sectional variety.
True.
So admittedly, I'm coming at it with that kind of perspective, but I just as a fan, and I guess I would have thought as a player that I would rather go to a Peach Bowl and play a Clemson, a Dabo Swinney-led Clemson team, than the Rose Bowl and a 2-loss Oregon team.
Yeah, well, I would say so. If
this is me.
Yeah, if I were going to rank my, by the way, all these playoff conversations, we haven't touched on any chance for a 1-loss Clemson team. Right, like, I agree with you.
Yeah, and I don't think this year there is.
Yeah, it's funny.
I think also tells you how quickly. Right, I mean, you've seen Oklahoma has almost dropped off the face of the earth here in terms of national. And listen, they could come back in another year or two. I'm not saying that's a permanent thing, but it's just things can change very, very quickly.
By the way, if Texas or Oklahoma had the exact same resume as TCU, they would be number 2 in the country, and there would be or 3 at the worst, and there'd be no question of them ever being
absolute lock.
So
No question.
brand, it's all about brand.
Yep.
If I were to give what I think the optimal bowl outcome for Penn State would be, it would be if we could play Clemson in the Orange Bowl and win. You got to win. But I think I'm thinking about this one, going back to why I'm hot to trot on the Rose Bowl. I am thinking about this entirely in terms of how do you frame the conversation going into the off season in order to woo a couple of key groups, recruits. Certainly fan enthusiasm will make James Franklin's job easier.
Yep.
Booster enthusiasm will be huge because we need some pocketbooks to open up for NIL. And, I've mentioned this before. You are auditioning for some new bosses. I think being able to put a double-digit win season plus New Year's Six bowl win under your belt in year one is great. And so Rose Bowl, because of the prestige attached, because when you were going into recruits' living rooms, you can flash a Rose Bowl ring. You can talk about a name that will be instantly recognizable and meaningful to them and their families. That's big. But given the choice, I would rather be given the chance to beat Clemson purely because of what they have been for the last however many years and the number of head-to-head recruiting battles, key recruiting battles Penn State has lost to them. Yes, USC and Penn State recruit nationally. There are going to be way fewer head-to-head battles for recruits between USC and Penn State than there have been and will continue to be for Clemson. Because basically anybody on the East Coast is in the recruiting footprint of Clemson and Penn State.
Yeah. I will say USC, too, would get you I do think there are a lot of interesting storylines. Obviously, the potential at
we do not have a good history going back to before the Second World War against USC in the Rose Bowl. So I don't know if I want that smoke.
Well, but I think that's part of it too.
Can
you overcome? I mean, again, if we're painting the scenario, best case scenario here, it would be okay now. Clearly, the program has taken a jump. We actually defeated USC in a Rose Bowl and setting the stage for the USC's entry into the Big Ten. All of it. I mean, I think that there is a lot of upside, potential upside there for Penn State with that particular matchup.
Still no guarantee even that USC comes out of the UCLA game victorious because their defense is terrible.
No question. No, and I do think I still think there's a lot of things that can happen that we're not just across the board in college football that we're not taking into account right now as we sit here. And that's why I just don't think for as much as people think things are pretty well settled, we'll see how this thing plays out. I just think the potential is there for a lot more chaos still to come. And not just
I think
in
you're
the
right.
college football playoffs, but also in the kind of jockeying for the New Year's Six Bowls and just the way teams are going to be perceived based on how they finish. And again, I think Penn State, the positive side here again is that you have a very good opportunity to finish with a nice win streak here and gain some confidence and momentum going into that bowl game. And then obviously if you can win that over what should be a pretty marquee opponent, it gets the buzz going. And I think with the talent, young talent that Penn State has coming back next year, should have a more veteran offensive line and some depth. I mean, the upside to what has been a tough season here in terms of the injury front to that offensive line is they are getting a lot of guys, including some promising young linemen, some significant playing time here. And in part, I think because of who Penn State has played and the matchups, but they're gaining some confidence here. I mean, this is again, these guys are stepping in and admittedly not taking on the Michigans and the Ohio States of the world, but they are putting together some impressive blocks to get that ground game.
Yeah,
to look very good.
They are, at least if not actual freshmen like Drew Shelton, they are newcomers to the Big Ten in terms of facing Big Ten quality linemen down in and down out in a guy like JB Nelson. And yeah, man, in going back to last year when PJ Mustipher got hurt, and that created some openings for our young defensive linemen to start getting more reps than they would have otherwise. That's paid some dividends this year. And there have not been, granted, against not the best competition in the world, but there have not been the kinds of growing pains that you saw with some of those kids stepping in to fill PJ's snaps last season along the O-line. So again, I think another important storyline going into the offseason, it's all about the energy you carry with you into the winter and the spring and the summer. I think one of the big question marks heading into this season is year one of Mike Yursich, not so good. Offensive line continues to be a pain point, like Phil Troutline. A lot of people putting you under the microscope. I think both of those guys have had very, very good seasons in terms of being able to answer the question marks facing them in late August of this year.
I don't think there's any question about that.
And that's great. That's good for stability. That's good for the program. That's good for recruiting. It's good for just the energy you have inside and outside the building. Just I am putting the Rutger win in the books. Do not, for the love of Christ, do not trip feet short of the finish line against Michigan State. And that's going to be the conversation all week. James has never gone a full regular season without losing as a favorite once. And it would be phenomenal for him and for my mental health for that to happen.
Yes, and I do think, part of that is going to be managing the emotions of senior day. To go back to that senior class. And, I don't know what the atmosphere is going to be like on Thanksgiving weekend. I'm not expecting a jam-packed student section for sure, but it has been a remarkable senior group, and I'm sure there are going to be emotions running high as you run through that tunnel for what will be the final time
for sure
as a player, and it's obviously different any other time. So I think part of it is just going to be managing those emotions and not letting stuff get away from you. And but I think once they settle in, and again, I know Michigan State's been playing better. I mean, Penn State has the better team, and that's always at home with the better team is you'll take that every time in terms of, all right, let's take our chances with this scenario. So, but yeah, I mean, they've got to take care of business and go out and finish it up. But
it really doesn't feel to me like a team that is going to have one of those trademark Michigan State losses.
I don't think so either for a lot of the reasons that we've been talking about. And I just think the motivation is there, unlike the last couple of years. These guys, I think, are hungry to try to get to the Rose Bowl, and that will still definitively, I am assuming they're taking care of business against Rutgers. That is going to be on the table.
If they don't, we've got way bigger problems
as they get ready for
Michigan State.
That game at the very least. And I think that even if the Rose Bowl, if Ohio State blows Michigan out, which I don't think is going to happen, but then they see that result and that it ends up being a 3:30 kickoff for Michigan State, they know that they're going to have an opportunity to play a marquee opponent in a marquee bowl game, and they want to finish this thing off. The double-digit victory thing, I do think, is a significant mark, a milestone for a team, and getting another 10-win season for James Franklin is significant. So
if you're a guy like
all
Mustafa or Clifford, you can think about through all the ups and downs of my career, I've played on 2 Penn State football teams that finished the season with a single-digit number next to their name in the rankings.
Yeah.
Pretty good. And if you're one of these young guys, you think about, man, we're going to finish. Let's try to finish somewhere here in the top 10, and that I want that to be the floor for my career.
Yep. Not too bad. And real quickly, Penn State basketball, of course, today does
still undefeated, baby.
Does hold off Furman.
Can I just briefly
68.
comment on that game?
Yep.
So Furman, okay, right? Like not like a huge. We were just talking about 300 teams are eligible to make the tournament. Yep. Furman, not a huge brand name, but in the world of mid-major basketball, like not a bad program.
No, and that's a good on a neutral floor. That is a good win to get. I mean, it'd be a bad loss to have taken, but it is a good win.
At this time of the season, that is a great way to think of it. There are teams that can be good wins but bad losses.
Yes,
right. And Furman's right in there. They came into the game averaging over 80 points per game. So Penn State defensively held them well below their season scoring average. And why was it close at the end? Because of what was already identified very early on. Before Penn State played a single game, there's going to be, an issue for this team. Not a lot of size in the front court to speak of. So no game in the paint, no, rebounding is going to be an issue. And so you're going to live and die with your distance shooting. And as soon as the long range shooting went cold for a little bit, you're up against a team that can shoot it. They got hot. Penn State got cold. Furman gets back into it. But now back-to-back games against Butler, Furman, 2 teams that are good wins but would have been bad losses. To me, Ironhead, most years Penn State basketball is 3-2 now because you cough up leads late against those kind of games. Exactly. They trademark Penn State basketball loss. And we won them both. Yeah, we stayed composed and got the buckets and the stops that we needed.
And now set up an opportunity to get a quality win if Virginia Tech or Old Dominion, but assuming it's for Virginia Tech. I mean, I think an opportunity here for Penn State to really definitively take that next step here as a program.
Yeah.
And I just
you cap this off with a Power 5 win for sure.
And I think that the other thing that is doing is we go back to the confidence part of it. I just think the confidence within that locker room is growing, and I think you can see it. It wasn't
agreed.
As you said, there have been plenty of times in recent years where, okay, Furman gets hot, we're cold, and you see, man, that's one we could have had, but it got away from you. And, this team has enough resilience, confidence, combination of
there's that old saying, the harder I work, the luckier I get. Yep. Well, I do think there's some of that too. I mean, man, Penn State basketball has had over the last however many years some of the worst luck I have seen with desperation three-pointers going in with a team that has clawed itself back into the game. And Furman had a couple of those looks today that just would have dropped on other Penn State teams, and they didn't.
Yeah, and the other thing that just feels different again is normally when we're talking about a Penn State team that we think might be able to get to the NCAA tournament, it is a senior-laden team. It is a team that is gritty, plays. And I do think this team is gritty, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But this team is talented.
It's not like we've been building towards this for 6 years. Now we got to do it before all these guys graduate.
It doesn't have to have everything come together just right. It's good, man. This is a good team. Now it's in a great conference, so exactly where it pans out, we'll see. But man, I think this is going to be a different type of season. I've felt it from day one, and not just season. I mean, I truly, genuinely believe for the first time in a long time that Penn State is, as a program, going to take that next step. I'm not saying they're going to be in the NCAA tournament every year, but I don't think it's going to be a once a decade. Man, we got to savor this because it may be a long time. I think they're going to be there, 3, maybe 4 years out of every 5 for as long as Shrewsbury is here. Now that could be that could be another story that we'll delve into another time, because hopefully that can be a long-term deal here, because I do think with his recruiting and with his basketball expertise, I mean, as long as he's here, I really do. I think Penn State is right in the mix here in the Big Ten on a consistent basis. Whether or not Penn State could go out and find the next Shrewsbury if he leaves after a couple of years or a few years, I'm not as confident or convinced of that. But hopefully we don't have to find out. And just real quick as we finish up here, what an exciting time right now for Penn State athletics as a whole. Field hockey in the Final Four. I think women's soccer is playing like it may play its way into the Final Four when it's all said and done. Mm-hmm. Wrestling team will be at the Black Knight Invitational on Sunday, looking very good. Hockey team looking like it can play with anybody in the country. Has some really big weekends coming up. Good one.
Big series this weekend at home with Michigan State.
And then basketball again, just continuing to find ways to get the W, and another big opportunity here down in North Carolina this weekend as well.
Good stuff.
Penn State, again, will hammer Rutgers. We're all in agreement. Take it to the bank. Nothing can go wrong with that plan. Steelers, we'll see. Eagles, we'll see. Who do the Eagles have? I'm forgetting. Steelers got moved to the out of prime time against the Bengals to the whatever it is, 4:15 or 4:25 kickoff.
I absolutely just brain farted on who Philadelphia's playing this weekend.
Sunday. Well, regardless, I suspect the Eagles are going to bounce back just fine after their loss, and I'm kind of with Goon. I think it's a good thing. The undefeated thing kind of takes on a life of its own, and I think you want that bubble burst at least well before the playoffs anyway.
It's not ironclad, but it's a pretty strong rule of the NFC East that the division leader will just inevitably split with one of the lesser teams.
Yeah.
I kind of had a bad feeling going into that game. Taylor Heineke's been on one of his patented hot streaks, guaranteed, also like not ironclad, but pretty much guaranteed to end in spectacular fashion in the not too distant future, potentially this weekend. And look, how many times are you going to have a confluence of a game where a team converts 58 and 55-yard field goals? You turn the ball over 3 times, all 3 in like kind of crazy fluky fashion, and god-awful officiating that impacts the outcome of the game all together in one scenario. Like every once in a while, the night is just not going your way. And that's the way it was for Philadelphia. And they've made 2 really strong signings this week to address what was one of the biggest problems for them the last 2 weeks against Houston and against Washington, was the run game with Jordan Davis out. Like it is unbelievable, the difference, the night and day difference in Philadelphia's run defense when Jordan Davis was available in the last couple of weeks when he's been out. So they go out and they sign Linval Joseph, who is just a big fire plug, 330-pounder to put in there on the interior line, and kind of 34-year-old. He's not going to play a ton of snaps, but he's going to be in the rotation. You can put him in obvious rundowns to fill that Jordan Davis void until he comes back, and then he's a depth guy thereafter. Yep. And they bring in Ndamukong Suh, another veteran who's probably not going to play a lot of snaps, but what he is going to do is spell Fletcher Cox.
Yeah.
You got a couple of these defensive linemen who are long in the tooth, and you just want to give him a chance to go to the bench a little bit more so that the snaps you play him for, you're getting his best stuff. He's fresher. So I think really good week by Howie and reclaiming a couple of these journeyman defensive linemen who help address some pressing needs that came out of the loss last week.
Eagles play the Colts, by the way.
That's right.
On Sunday,
yes. So. And mercifully, do you remember when we were doing the game-by-game predictions? I was like, God, please just whatever you do, don't make me have to watch Nick Foles versus Philadelphia.
I do.
And it looks like Nick's going to be the emergency quarterback this week. So, unless Matt Ryan and Sam Ellinger both get hurt, I'm going to get my wish. That would my heart couldn't take it. My heart could not take Nick Foles versus the Eagles.
We will be back on Tuesday to talk about all of the excitement of the weekend that will be, and by then we'll have been in sports. Until Tuesday, be good and be safe.
Beat Rutgers.
Make more good in the all-new Sportage X-Pro. Kia, movement that inspires.
Quaker Steak and Lube is throwing open the garage doors and setting up the umbrellas. It's patio season. Come enjoy great food, drinks, and fun in the sun. There's always something happening at Quaker Steak and Lube, but we're really amping up our event calendars for our favorite time of year. Visit thelube.com to find out what's happening at your local lube this season. Lunch, happy hour, dinner, or late night, indoors or outside, at Quaker Steak and Lube, you'll always find big flavors, friendly faces, and lots of fun.
New Trail Brewing Company proudly crafts their beers right here in central Pennsylvania. Brewed with only the best possible ingredients, New Trail produces a variety of year-round brands as well as weekly experimental recipes. New Trail Broken Heels is Pennsylvania's favorite local hazy IPA. This beer is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is perfect for a pregame tailgate all the way through the victory celebration.
What's the best mid-size pickup? Tacoma. What's the #1 mid-size truck in resale value? Tacoma. Want to get great gas mileage, 4 doors, and 4-wheel drive? Tacoma. Sioka Toyota of Williamsport has over 25 available right now. You can lease a brand new, never-driven Toyota Tacoma for just $379 a month. That's 30 months, 3,000 cash or trade, 10,000 miles a year. This is while supplies last. Buy yours or reserve yours today and see the Sioka difference. And remember, tell them Johnny sent.